spoke for 28 minutes in spite of promising faithfully he would stick to 25, so obviously I'm going to give Jim the prerogative of the extra 3 minutes as well if required. So I'll bring in Jim to reply to Joe. Thanks.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here. Somebody asked me this evening, what in the name of God was I coming along to speak at something like this for? And my attitude is that I have an open mind. I am not wedded to any ideological belief. I am delighted to hear the solutions offered by Joe Higgins tonight. I think he chose badly actually in getting me along to debate tonight, because I have to say I'd agree with an awful lot of what Joe has said tonight. I mean, I abhor ICTU, and I'd go further to say that I abhor IBEG as well. I mean, I think social partnership has been one of the most anti-democratic institutions that this state has ever created. People that I do not elect to make decisions on how I run my life are actually making those decisions, from Father Sean Healy all the way over and back. So, there's a very good friend of mine who's a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, and another very good friend of mine who'd like to be, but he can't because he works for a financial institution. But the two of them are in the West Bank this week, just doing a little bit of exploration of what's going on out there. But one of them texted me on Saturday and said he nearly crashed his car when he saw me on a pole under the Socialist Workers' Party logo. And he said that unfortunately he wouldn't be able to come along tonight to witness it because he was going to be in the West Bank, but he reckoned he would have a much better chance of getting out of the West Bank alive than I will out of here tonight. But only time will answer that question. Just to, I suppose, address a few of the issues that Joe brought up there. You know, nationalisation of the banks, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's inevitable. It's going to happen, and shareholders' investment is going to be wiped out over the coming months. I don't know when the decision is going to be taken, but there is a huge level of inevitability about it. I have argued that the privatisation of Eircom back in 1999 was a huge strategic mistake. Because you hand over the management of an asset like that to a venture capitalist, by definition you are not going to get investment in long-term broadband infrastructure, which has a very slow capital return to the country. So I'd agree with that, but I would totally disagree with the notion of the state running hotels, for example. And I would also seriously question actually the ability of the state to run anything. I mean, the state is not capable of running the health service. So would the state be capable of running a bank? Would it be capable of running an airline? Well, it has proved in the past that it's not. So I'm just not convinced that handing everything over to state ownership is actually going to give us a better outcome. Because when we had a country in state ownership, we were at that stage also a political and economic failure. Jean Kerrigan picked a number of things out that, like Joe, I failed to unearth actually that round table that I was meant to have spoken at. But what I had said on numerous occasions, I couldn't find it, but I speak at so many things that perhaps it's in there someplace. But what I've always felt on regulation, and what I was arguing that day, well, I'm not sure about the day, but what I would have argued in general about regulation is that the answer, and Jean Kerrigan picked the comment totally out of context. The answer is not more regulation. The answer is the quality of regulation. It's the quality. You can put all of the regulatory regimes in the world in place. If that regulation is not applied, well then it's not going to work and you are going to get market failure. So I would have always advocated the quality of regulation rather than the quantity. There has been an attitude in this country in recent years that everything was driven by the quantity. The amount of economic growth we were generating, the number of jobs we were creating, the amount of regulation we had in place. There was never any analysis whatsoever about the quality of what we were doing. And I would have argued back in 2004 that the quantity of jobs and economic growth we were generating in the economy were not sustainable. You know, a situation where over the previous 5 years, up to the beginning of last year, 60% of the jobs created in the economy were in the public sector and in the construction sector. And then all those, the rest that were created in the financial services sector, were on the back of the mortgage market as well. None of that was sustainable because, quite simply, there is a finite limit to how much concrete you need to pump into the ground. So, moving on to the issue around the debate tonight, you know, the Irish economy, and indeed the global economy, is in a total crisis situation at the moment. There is no doubt about that. And it is very easy to jump to the conclusion, and a very large part of me does jump to the conclusion, that the unfettered free market has failed. Last year, when I was reading Alan Greenspan's biography, The Age of Turbulence, he actually boasted about the way he stood up to the proposals to try and regulate the growth of the subprime mortgage market in the United States 6-7 years ago. He admitted a few months back that that was a mistake. I think having anybody running an economy and a society that is blindly driven by ideological beliefs is a huge mistake, on the right or on the left. I happen to believe that a free market system, properly regulated, and I mean properly regulated, is, to me, one of the better models that can be created. The failures we're suffering, we're enduring today, and I am a working person also. You know, I'm being utterly screwed as well by government at the moment. So, you know, I'd like to make that point. And there is every possibility that, you know, I could find myself unemployed in the next month or two, because I work on a part-time basis with Friends First 3 days a week. So I could be out of a job in a month's time, who knows. So I am suffering the same sort of pain as many other people out there. I made a conscious decision 7 years ago, having worked in banking for 20 years, that it was not the type of environment I wanted to work in. I argued at a conference in the EU Commission offices 6 months ago that I always worried about the manner in which bankers were incentivised. They were incentivised to sell, sell, sell. It was all about quantity. There was never any examination of the quality of what was done. And when I see some of the people that credit cards were sold to, that mortgages were sold to, when I see Permanent TSB a few years back introduced a product called a current account mortgage, where you could go out and sign a cheque on your mortgage for a foreign holiday, to change the car, plastic surgery, whatever, and end up paying for it over 30 years. I didn't, incidentally, but end up, that was a joke, end up paying for it over 30 years. I mean, there was utter lunacy in the whole system, and I got out of that system. I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't fit into that. So, you know, I keep sensing, Joe, you invited the wrong person to debate with you tonight. I would not regard myself as a right-wing ideological economist. I tend to try and judge every situation on its own merits. I am utterly opposed, for example, and I went on RT television at the IMO conference in Killarney 3 years ago, arguing that co-location, in my view, would be a disaster. And I had a phone call from Mary Harney's advisor 10 minutes after I came off TV, telling me he was surprised at me. But so I am not ideologically blind. I tend to judge every situation on its own merits. The Washington Consensus, I outlined what the Washington Consensus was suggesting about the way for developing economies to develop. Parts of it, you know, are clearly flawed, but large parts of it, one part that Joe did not mention, for example, was the strong anti-corruption laws that should be in place. You know, and that is certainly something that has fallen down in this country. I mean, if you look at where the world economy is and where the Irish economy is at the moment, I mean, what got us here? Well, greed got us here. And it's not just bankers and developers are guilty of that greed. We all, to some extent, bought into the whole dream. People who invested in properties in Cape Verde, in Budapest, that's all driven by greed. So greed spreads throughout large parts, not all obviously, but large parts of society.